that's sort of my preamble. First question I'd love to just pose is, how many of you can remember something that your parents said or did when you were a child, that some part of your inner being, either then or later in life, just knew that when you were a grown-up and you were a parent, this is absolutely what you would not do. You would not repeat this choice. I'd like to see a show of hands how many people can recall one of those. And how many of you have done that this week with your children? All right, so this sometimes is like the adage is, you're going to thank me for this one day. Right, that old saying. You don't know yet what it's like. You will one day when you're my age, you'll see. Is it painful? Is it painful in that moment when you find yourself repeating this thing that the part of you that's a child remembers not enjoying, and yet in that moment there's nothing else that makes sense to you to do or say that contributes to getting what you want? Is that a moment of like inner consternation for those of you who had your hands up? I see some heads being up. So first I just want to be with a little tenderness around it. Time and time again, I want to come back to self-compassion. That in any given moment, we're doing the best we know how to do with the resources available to us, with what we know. And that the goal is to be kind to ourselves and to know ourselves better so that we can transform those habits into something that is more aligned with our values. I don't believe that transformation happens if we beat ourselves up, if we call ourselves names, if we are judgmental to ourselves. Okay? So that kind of leads me to my next question. Whose voice is in your mind when you are judging yourself? Who do you sound like when you talk to yourself in less than kind ways? Does anyone sound like their mother? Does anyone sound like their father? Does anyone sound like a primary attachment figure who talked a certain way, a certain style when you were young, and maybe asked you questions like, what were you thinking? What's wrong with you? So one of the ways I imagine that this practice that we're going to explore can break these cycles is sort of, again, a tender and self-compassionate realization that for many of us, our inner voices are the voices of the people who spoke to us when we were young. That software got written that way. And that was through no fault of your own. You're not responsible for that. You haven't done anything bad. This is just something that was learned as part of your upbringing. And that if this is something that causes that inner consternation we were just talking about, here's a practice to begin to think about how to translate that voice, how to figure out what does that voice want and show up in my relationship with it. So given that my goal tonight is to unpack all that sort of stuff and offer some skills and principles for that, I'd love to know by show of hands, am I way off the mark? Is there someone here for whom, if we talk about that tonight, they would really love to excuse themselves right now because they're in the wrong space at the wrong time? And then now, yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, in my analysis of what goes on for me, it's a little bit different than that. It's more the response that I took on about how I felt about myself that I respond out of, as opposed to what was spoken to. That's how it was spoken.
I'm not quite sure I understand. Can you just give me a little bit more of an
Yeah,
example?
so like, like an opinion I formed of myself at a young age. Feeling inadequate or insecure or not good enough.
Yeah.
That it's more out of that as opposed to someone necessarily speaking a certain way.
Yeah.
It's just
So you can't quite recapture somebody saying or doing something, but
Right.
you recognize that some part of your journey of development, you at some point started to think of yourself as less than
right,
or not deserving of.
right.
And this thought, right, and I would hope by the end of the evening I can really have some companionship that this is a thought and not a feeling. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But this thought sort of has stayed with you and is sort of the orientation that a lot of your life is filtered through. Am I getting that right? Yeah.
Well, I have have a 15-year-old daughter, and when she was younger, she had a very positive self-image, and then with puberty, it turned very negative suddenly. And I find oftentimes that even the parenting hasn't changed. We're still trying to be positive, but she projects a lot of her negative self-thoughts onto us, and she says, "Oh, you think I'm not good at that," and we have never even said that. So there's a lot of, I think maybe that's where
so it's confusing, I imagine, and puzzling.
It's not really what the parents are saying. It's projecting your own insecurities towards your parents.
Well, I'm guessing for you it's confusing and puzzling and sort of frightening to have so much love and admiration for your child in your heart and in your intention and to the best that you can in your words, and to then get this feedback from her that she's having an experience where that's not going in, where that's not the way you want to be understood. She can't. You're not getting the feedback from her that she's taking in what you want to be known for. Is that right?
Yeah.
So my hope is that some of what we'll do tonight might give you some tools for navigating that dialogue. And hearing some of her use as expressions of what's alive in her. And there's some requests she's making that we haven't gotten to the heart of yet. And maybe at the end of the night we'll have a little more skills and tools for doing that.
That's great.
I was wondering how much peer interaction forms self-image.
So the question is, like, how much does peer relationships inform self-image? And I would say as much as anything else. I mean, the great tragedy, in my view, is that we live sort of in a culture that uses shame and blame and diagnosis and judgment and evaluation to express ourselves. And it's very hard unless you are really resilient to all of that, or really having a source of support that is helping you translate all those messages and all that language in the world, to hold on to a real sense of your own inner beauty. So it's not just parents and child relationship, although that parent-child attachment relationship is a very powerful one. It's also how much your peer group affects you, how much television affects you, how much movies affect you, how much the stories we take in affect us. It's tragic. And the reason I do this work in the world is I believe the model that I really want to transition into is a consciousness. It's a different way of viewing the world. It's coming from a different orientation. And that if I see value in coming to the world from that different orientation, it's going to affect my life in many, many different areas. So first off, I want to really tackle what for me is often a tragically misunderstood piece of nonviolent communication and or compassionate communication. I see those two things as synonymous. Is that the word communication is in the name. Tragic because a lot of people will talk about what we're going to explore tonight as, I tried to use nonviolent communication and it didn't work. Or I did NVC and then I found that NVC is a lot better when I also use this modality or when I combine it with that modality. I don't hold this practice that I'm in love with as merely about language and merely about communication. It is first and foremost a consciousness. It is an orientation to life. It is an awareness practice. It's a place I can choose to put my attention when I want to prioritize connection. When I want to prioritize our relationship. That relationship with you or that relationship with myself. And it's a specific type of relationship that this practice is meant to engender. It's a relationship where compassionate giving can thrive. Where compassionate giving can thrive. When you and I, or I and I, know the full spectrum of what's alive in me in this moment, that whatever actions I choose to take, it comes from this place of generosity. It comes from the place of giving. It comes from the place of trying to serve life. So at this point, I really like to check in with people. Like, how many of you came here tonight hoping that you learned some tips and tools for getting your child to do what you want them to do? I love it. Like, it's there's something vulnerable and it's like an expression of helplessness or powerlessness. It's longing for trust and confidence. That wish of how do I get my child to do what I want? And I sort of humbly I'm here to disappoint you. Like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that, and I would add, I don't want to know how to do that. Like, that's the level of this consciousness that I'm inviting you to reorient around. I don't want to know how to get my child to do something, get my friend to do something, get my mother to do something. I want to know how to connect with them, hear what's important to them, what's true for them, share what's important to me, that's true for me, and from that connection, decide what we're going to do. And it is certainly possible, and I see it happen often, and it's one of the great gifts of the life that I get to lead, how often I see miraculous new solutions emerge from utter quagmires. And sometimes it looks like my child or my friend or my parent or my partner doing exactly what I want them to do. And sometimes it looks like something different. And sometimes it looks like just a painful, heartbreaking dilemma that isn't yet resolved. But the good news is, if what you want is your child or your lover or your partner or your friend or your neighbor to do what you want them to do, like if you're so clear that that's what you want, it's easy. I can tell you how to do it. Get a gun. You would be amazed at how easy it is to get somebody to do anything you want them to do with a gun. So there's a glibness there that also highlights to me the sort of most basic tragedy of the world we live in. That we spend so much of our effort and energy to try to get people to do what we want them to do, with threats of violence, or with punishment, or with reward, or with shame. And this consciousness, again, that I'm talking about, is nonviolence, which is not nonviolence, it's nonviolence. It's ahimsa in Sanskrit. It's a state of open-heartedness. This is a consciousness to come from. It's a perspective to come from. And it's in contrast to what many of us have learned culturally. Culturally, we've learned a separation. You get what you want, or I get what I want. It's me or you. Human beings are inherently selfish, and they will do anything they want to get what they want. You have to fight for what you want. That's one consciousness. That's the prevailing one. And what I'm inviting at the heart of this practice that we're going to explore today is a shift in orientation to interdependence. It is impossible for me to truly have the life inside of me be satisfied if it comes at a cost to you. We are interdependently connected. We rely on one another to survive. How radical is that? We rely actually on things called cooperation or collaboration to survive. I can't survive without you. That's where this orientation begins.